Going into Fear Street Part 2 after being so high on the first, I couldn't help but feel a little trepidation. Being the middle film, or for that matter the middle part of any bigger saga, is often tricky. You're neither the beginning of the story nor the ending of it, so you have to rise to the challenge of keeping things engaging while also not having the novelty of newness to your audience, nor the ability to provide a satisfying conclusion to the overarching loose ends. Your story still has to stand by itself somehow, with its own new narrative threads, characters and answers to questions. They just can't all be the answers or threads you've already got people invested in seeing. And Fear Street Part 2, even just from marketing alone before I'd even seen it, really felt like it might run into and trip on these hurdles. Because you look at the first film and you're like, oh, I get it, they're doing this whole kind of slasher by way of Stranger Things pastiche thing, lots of references to other films, there's like loads of killers, look, they got a Jason from Friday the 13th standing in there, that's cool. Then you look at the trilogy trailer and you're like, oh, that third film looks interesting. They've got like a huge budget, so they've pulled off this really great looking period piece vibe with like the religious 1600s witch trial setting. That looked so cool. Haven't really seen anything pull off that outside of Robert Eggers' The Witch. And then you look at the second film and you're just like, oh, it's just Friday the 13th again. I mean, sure, that's cool, but like, did they run out of ideas or something? Going into this thing, I was honestly kind of expecting to be let down. Like, don't get me wrong, the entire series literally builds itself on being this homage piece to horrors of old, and Friday the 13th is one of the biggest and most iconic slasher franchises of all time, but was that seriously all they were going to do? Was the first film going to be this huge mix of a bunch of different inspirations and influences, and the second was just going to go, yeah, we're just doing Friday the 13th for this one? Even after that film had already been homaged in the first? It certainly seemed that way. There's a summer camp, there's horny teens, and there's a big hulking murderer. And that's kind of it at first glance. It's a Friday the 13th story through and through on paper, and not only have we seen that several times already in its original franchise, but it wasn't even the first to do that story. So it was arguably already old hat then, being both a setting we'd seen before and a straight rip-off of Halloween done on a low budget. Plus, after I popularised this setting and tropes further, what started as a rip-off of Halloween has itself been ripped off, retold, and homaged so many times it isn't even really unique to put your own spin on it these days. We've had Friday the 13th but worse, Friday the 13th but meta, Friday the 13th but transphobic, Friday the 13th but years later and the final girl is going to therapy for survivor's guilt and PTSD. Side note, I'm reading this book right now and it is so good. Friday the 13th but Jason is the sidekick to the hero girl and they hunt other horror killers. Friday the 13th but in space. At this point it's like, what can you really even do when making your own Friday the 13th spin that hasn't been done before? Well, it turns out Fear Street Part 2 has the answer. And the answer is to barely make a Friday the 13th film at all, and instead make a really compelling story of sisterhood told through a lens of poverty struggles and class division. Fucking what? How did they make this so good? Fear Street Part 2 starts with Dina and her brother Josh from the first film tying up Dina's witch-possessed girlfriend Sam and seeking help from a previous survivor of one of Shadyside's witches' curse-inspired massacres. Upon meeting this survivor, she begins to recount the events of the massacre at Camp Nightwing and the killings that took her sister's life back in 1978. Jumping through time as she tells her tale, the audience is swished from the neon-glossed 90s malls of the first film to the sun-drenched scenic woodsy outdoors of this one, where we are introduced to the aforementioned sisters. There's Ziggy, the younger camper of the two, a rebellious, outspoken girl constantly getting herself into trouble with bullies and the camp staff, and Cindy, the older camp counsellor who's an uptight goody two-shoes, determined to escape her small town of Shadyside through academic achievement and sick of her younger sister's constant scrapes and cynical worldview. What should be your normal camp experience, albeit one with a lot of sibling bickering, quickly goes very wrong for the two sisters and the rest of the camping kids and counsellors when the campsite nurse seemingly goes insane and attacks Cindy's boyfriend and fellow camp counsellor Tommy, claiming that, one way or another, he will die tonight. Confused by the nurse's motive, Cindy and Tommy investigate her office where they find Cindy's former friend Alice and her boyfriend Arnie trying to score some free drugs from her pharmacy. While there, the four discover a map and, wondering if it has something to do with the nurse's freakout, decide to investigate. This leads them to stumble upon a witch's house, where a series of events lead to Cindy being trapped in a landslide, and during all of these investigative activities, a killer appears within the camp and begins picking off the campers one by one. With Cindy trapped and her sister Ziggy potentially the next number on the kill count as she tries to protect the surviving campers from the deranged murderer, it's up to the two of them to help each other, stop the killer, save the campers, and put an end to the witch's curse. So that's kind of the brief gist of things, but make no mistake, this isn't the simplistic slasher that such a summary would suggest. Fear Street Part 2 is a movie that has Friday the 13th set dressing, sure, but for all of its slashing and slicing of horny camp counsellors, it's just as intently focused on building an emotional core, with well-rounded and developed characters, as well as expanding on the themes of the first movie and delivering an even tighter focus on the previously established theme of class division. The key driving antagonistic forces of this film are held together, much like in the first film, by a witch's curse. But that isn't the only curse that plagues our heroes. The real curse is poverty. Like, yes, obviously there is an actual witch who cast a vengeful magic spell on the town of Shadyside, but this is a movie that uses the horror of a witch's curse as analogous to the horrors of class struggle, and that is such a good way to explore these ideas. The film presents this curse as something out of the characters of this town's control. They can make all the right decisions and still fail under its grasp. It's somewhat invisible, it's historically implemented, but its effects are still felt in the struggles of future generations for centuries after. And a lot of people don't even believe the curse exists and repeat the mantra throughout the movie of "damn Shadysiders," as if these struggles are entirely the individual's responsibility with no external factors. That is such a clear mirror image allegory of class divisions, the issues that cause them, and how they're discussed in our society, that I don't think you can get any less subtle, to be honest. This isn't even so much an analysis of subtext either, as much as it is just straight up text. The main friction between our two sororal leads revolves entirely around this matter. The younger Ziggy having a huge chip on her shoulder due to the way the preppier, posher, upper class kids of Sunnyvale treat her, the issues the general everyday poverty of Shadyside has thrust upon her, such as her father's escape into affairs, her mother's escape into alcoholism, financial losses meaning the family is going to lose their home, as well as the general feeling of helplessness of escaping this life and town. Long before any witch's spell rears its head in this film, Ziggy already rants angrily to her sister of a curse. Only the one she describes is a more metaphorical one. A general vibe that there's no escape, no freedom, no good futures waiting for the residents of Shadyside, and as she puts it to her sister, no amount of saving for a super cute polo shirt will change that. Meanwhile, Cindy's main reason for butting heads with her sister is because if Ziggy gets kicked out of camp, then she will have to leave with her too, because their mother can't afford to take time off work to watch Ziggy over summer. Once again, everything comes back to finances. Cindy's main frustrations in the early moments of this film revolve around her image and reputation. She feels like she needs to be perceived to be the best she can be in order to somehow ascend above her station of Shadyside. She's overly optimistic, overly hardworking. She's letting herself believe in this almost, I guess, American dream-like lie that people who stay in this shitty situation stay that way because they don't work hard enough. She's a pull-up-your-bootstraps sort of girl, and she keeps telling herself that if she could just get the right grades, and go to the right college, and act like the right people, then she too will have just as many opportunities to receive as her richer Sunnyvale counterparts. An idea that's further cemented when she is in complete denial over physical evidence of the witch's curse being the reason Shadysiders have been ruining their lives with horrendous acts of violence, choosing instead to believe that these were the faults of individuals and their responsibility, blaming these shortcomings and violent outbursts on individualistic failings like drug use or not being able to handle pressure, rather than the more complicated idea of a witch's curse whose historical impact is still felt today. In fact, the only real reason she investigates the nurse's motives for attacking Tommy isn't out of concern, but rather as a way to find a convenient and easy to understand excuse for the nurse's actions that doesn't force her to question her own beliefs. It's an attempt for Cindy to find a way to say, yes! There is no systemic problem with Shadyside that causes its citizens to act with disproportionately high levels of bad life choices and violence, This woman was just on drugs. That explains everything. I will not, of course, question why this person feels the need to escape into drugs, or why many Shadyside-ers like my parents, my ex-best friend who I abandoned, or any of the other countless numbers of random killers and victims have similar life-ruining problems. They were probably just high or weak, and that's their issue. I'm not like them. I'm gonna work hard and get out of here. Cindy tries her best to deny the issues her underprivileged town faces. She tries to blend in with the richer Sunnyvalers in the way she dresses and acts, something that in Ziggy's eyes makes her kind of a class traitor, and has put her at odds with her former friend Alice, who has her own tragic methods of coping with the general ennui of their living situation. This is one of those sequels that's so good it actually enhances the previous entry by recontextualizing your understanding of it. Before this movie, Fear Street Part 1 did have brief nods to its narrative world's class division, sure. The rivalry between the poorer, more working class school of Shadyside and the spoiled preppy types of Sunnyvale made for an interesting commentary and backdrop, but it never quite got to the point where those themes and ideas felt at the forefront of the movie. But now with this second film, they don't just pop out more, but rather it feels like this is the overriding message of the trilogy. In the first film, when Sam, as Dina put it, quote unquote, ran away to Sunnyvale, the movie framed this as just a romantic breakup issue. Perhaps her just forcing herself to move on before anyone was ready for it. But it's much more than that now. Much like Cindy here, the focus now retroactively becomes on Sam pretending to be someone she's not. Being a sapphic woman still in love with Dina, while stood at a vigil with her handsy football-playing varsity boyfriend, who is so unimportant they barely even have any on-screen dialogue with each other. It gives the deaths of the first film more meaning. They aren't just sudden shock value moments now they're filled with a greater sense of tragedy and unfairness, even more so than before. I find it incredibly interesting now that the girl who got the most brutal and undeserving death in that first film was the one who was a lot like Cindy in many ways. She was the hardest working, the most academically achieving, she's valedictorian, she's president of every extracurricular club in the school, and as she puts it, she's getting out of here, off to claim her place among the stars. And on paper, she's the most likely to do that, to succeed and escape Shadyside. But she didn't. Because of course she didn't. Because nobody does. Nobody can beat the system. She worked hard her entire short life, but it doesn't matter because ultimately she meets a disgustingly unfair end and is written off historically as just some junkie. Another violent statistic in the town's history. Another Shadyside failure. Fear Street Part 2 has instantly made the whole trilogy more rich. It's recontextualized the first film and gave a more solid thematic footing for the third to kick off from. But what's really superb about it is that while it works extremely well on a thematic level, it works just as well at being a really damn good looking and wildly entertaining horror and slasher too. The pace is a little slower on the build to start with, but once it kicks off with that first murder, it amps up hugely to a fast, relentless and action-packed horror movie full of fun scares, gore and thrills, and never at the expense of putting its characters on the backbenches. The horrific events that unfold all serving as a great catalyst for the sisters to have strong emotional arcs, with Ziggy learning how much she loves her sister and softening her edges, while the horrors of the curse on Cindy's end letting her finally be honest with herself about who she is. A particularly great moment of symbolism and character building sees her tear her super cute polo shirt, a symbol of the thing she's pretending to be, in order to make a tourniquet to help a wounded fellow Shadysider. It's great stuff. A literal tearing of her ties to her old character that only comes as a result of the violent circumstances they find themselves in. The perfect pairing of plot and theme. They definitely took one out of Ready or Not Spook there, but it works just as well here. Besides that, there's also just a healthy scattering of incredibly fun scenes and moments throughout the whole thing. From an ophidiophobic character having to hold her breath while a snake crawls over her, to a fun, tense scene that gives the main killer his unique look in a creative little way, to some cool world building with the introduction of another killer from the Witch's back catalogue who we've literally never seen before, alluding to a much greater history than what we've already had origin stories for. He just kind of pops up and it's like, there he is, and I honestly hope this creepy little guy is never explained and that we just have to assume he's another sad case from the town's history, shrouded in mystery. And all of this, of course, is wrapped up in a genuinely strong emotional core, revolving around the two sisters refinding their love for one another buried deep beneath all the cynicism and bickering. I'm not gonna lie, I got a little glassy-eyed towards the end. It's really sweet. The only thing that totally didn't work for me, and I'll say this without spoiling it, is that at a late point, there's a big reveal. And I know it's supposed to be a big reveal because the way it's framed and the characters' reactions to it tell me and communicate to me this is a big reveal. But the information we learn from this reveal, I had literally assumed was the case from the start. That's not me being the guy who's like, oh, I totally saw this coming, by the way. I didn't guess any twist. I just figured we were aware of this information. Like, personally, I felt like the film clearly framed things a specific way in order to communicate this information from the beginning. Maybe that's just me though, because I know others who watched it certainly felt the surprise when it came. Other than that though, I'm pretty happy to just say I've loved it. Sure, occasionally there's a line of dialogue that's on the nose, or maybe something reads a little cheesy, but those things are so inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. It's a bloody good time. I will warn people though that the killings this time round are relentless in who dies. Like, Jesus. I know the last film had that really shocking moment with the bread slicer, and I understand here it's thematically important that likeable people who did no wrong other than to be born in the wrong place make the kill count, but like, this has some murders that might be a bit much for some people. There was one that just genuinely bummed me out, and not in a, oh, the film is having a moment where I'm supposed to feel sad sort of way, and more of a well, that's miserable. Look, I'm just going to put it out there bluntly because I know this might be a sticking point for some people, but this film kills a lot of kids. And I don't mean teens, I mean kids. Like, young children. I realise that doesn't paint this as a fun movie, but trust me, it is. In spite of this, it manages to keep things pretty light, breezy, and fun in tone as opposed to just miserable, but just, you know, maybe be aware that it can be a little brutal, and maybe give it a miss if you think that's not for you. It's not there without purpose. It certainly raises the stakes and creates an all bets are off, anyone can die kind of setup, and thematically obviously it feeds into the dramatic unfairness with all the kids who die being shady-siders. Plus, after seeing those deaths, you really, really want them to break that curse somehow in the third movie. Like, fuck me, if I wasn't already rooting for the heroes, I certainly am now, but it just feels like something I should mention. And please, no weird gatekeepers in the comments about how someone who can't handle seeing kids die shouldn't be watching horrors in the first place or anything like that. Different people have different things that bother them. I know this is one for a lot of people. I still had a great time with it. I'm just spotlighting it as a potential issue for anyone who might go into it on my recommendation and find that too upsetting. Don't be a dick and be weird about it. But yeah, all in all, I think this movie rules. Probably even more than the first one, which I also loved. If the third film can pull off this level of quality, then this will have quietly and unexpectedly become probably my favourite horror trilogy there is. So fingers crossed they stick the landing. Speaking of the third film, I'll probably cover that too. So if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, be sure to like, comment and subscribe to my Only Dans by clicking the red subscribe button below and make sure to hit the bell. Also, if you'd like to support me and see your own name in these credits now appearing on screen, as well as gain access to a bunch of cool stuff like Q&A videos, original short films, unused scripts and movie pitches, an active private Discord channel, a chance for a video shout out and much more, then check out my Patreon at the link in the description. Currently there's an offer running where the first 100 patrons get permanent access to all the content put out on higher tiers for as little as $1. So if that sounds like something that interests you, check it out. This week, I would like to give a special thanks to my patrons, Stina Gordon, Robert McSwain, Christian, and I am here for Darkened Streams. Anyway, I've been Dan Drambles. Once again, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next video.